Hello there, and welcome to another episode of the Change Your Minds podcast. I'm Owen Fitzpatrick, and today I'm going to talk about why we lie to ourselves and believe whatever it is that we want. Isn't it true? Don't we do that? We lie to ourselves. We pretend something's the truth. Then maybe you're saying to yourself, but Owen, I don't lie to myself. And if so, perfect. You are now lying to yourself, right? We all do it. We all, if we're being honest, which is the opposite to self-deception, we all are self-deceivers in a number of different ways. And what's important to recognize is that that's part of human nature. It's not something necessarily that is wrong with you, but it is something that we need to recognize and become aware of if we are to make a change to it. And so what I want to do in this podcast is really open your eyes, I'm hoping, just like my eyes were open as I learned more and more about this, to self-deception. We're going to look at, first of all, how self-deception works. We'll look at how we delude ourselves. What are some of the strategies we use? We'll talk about why we delude ourselves. We'll look at how this kind of manifests. And most importantly, like ever, I can't leave you hanging. I'm not going to leave you in a situation where I go, by the way, here's what's wrong and you're lying to yourself and it's ruining your life. Bye. I'm obviously going to give you some strategies. I'm going to give you some tools at the end to make it so that by the end of this, you walk away from this podcast episode. Or you turn over in your side if you're listening to it lying down, or you finish your run, or you finish in the gym, wherever you're listening to this episode. When you're finished, you're going to walk away with tools and skills to help you to reduce, I'll just say, how much you're lying to yourself in a way that empowers you, in a way that assists you, in a way that positively changes your life. So let's get into it. Let's start by talking about, well, how does self-deception work? And how self-deception works is, first and foremost, we have a need to feel right. The way I like to explain this is if we go to the hunter-gatherer phase, when we were hunting and gathering many thousands of years ago. Sometimes I feel so old, it's almost like I remember I was there. But when we were hunting and gathering, we had to be right. If you're wrong, you're dead, right? If you're looking at a lion and you're thinking to yourself, I think I could take him, that very thought is going to drive you into a very dangerous position. In fact, more than likely, you thinking that you can take the lion will make it so that you will probably meet your maker. We needed to be right. If we were wrong, because a lot of our decisions were about life or death, then we would die. And so our brain then rewarded us for being right. The problem is our brain rewarded us when we felt right as opposed to just rewarding us for being right. So we learned very early on in our evolution that we needed to feel right. We needed to feel a sense of certainty that we were acting in the best possible way, because your brain makes predictions about what it thinks the best thing to do is. And those predictions are driven by, in some ways, a form of probability. And so the more we feel we're correct, the better we feel, because we have a sense of certainty. And that sense of certainty means we're no longer feeling the fear that we get when we're not sure what the right thing to do is. So we have this need to feel right. And on top of that, we also have what we call motivated reasoning. Because we have the need to feel right, what happens is that we've certain motivations to want to believe in certain ideas. And we've got a phenomenal ability to convince ourselves of whatever we want. The way in which we think is that we think logically, we think rationally. We think we take on all the information, and then once we've taken it all on board, we make the most evaluative, logical, rational, reasonable decision we possibly can. The truth of the matter is, though, that more often than not, we get a sense as to what we want to believe. And then our brain goes to work and proves what we already think or what we already believe. This is sometimes mentioned as confirmation bias. We look for evidence to prove our conclusions are true, and we dismiss evidence that contradicts them. So our brains are actively looking to figure out how to make us right because we want to be right. And this is known as motivated reasoning. We are almost like engaging the lawyers or attorneys in our mind to prove whatever that belief is that we have at that moment. And by the way, those beliefs are not necessarily all positive beliefs. Sometimes you can have a negative belief that you believe, a limiting belief even. But that limited or negative belief is protecting you in some way. So if you believe that you're no good or you believe that no one will like you, the benefit of that belief is it might stop you from taking action, which in turn might prevent you from getting rejected, because you can't get rejected when you're not putting yourself out there. The problem is it thinks in terms of very short term. So our motivated reasoning is the fact that oftentimes we'll believe what we want to believe, even if it doesn't serve us. And to that end, we will deceive ourselves accordingly. There's also cognitive dissonance. This is when there's a state of tension between one belief that we have and another belief we have, a belief about who we are and a belief about what the right thing to do is, for example, or a belief that we have about who we are and an action that we're taking. And more often than not, what happens is that when you experience cognitive dissonance, your brain is trying to get you onto the same page. So it will try to adjust the behavior to fit back with your identity. So if you believe that you're a terrible partner, even if you're making a concrete effort to be a really good partner, eventually you revert back because your fundamental belief about yourself is, I'm the kind of person who does this. Same is true of weight loss. You can go on a diet, but if ultimately speaking, you see yourself as an unhealthy, unfit person, you'll revert back more often than not, because once again, your brain doesn't like the cognitive dissonance. When it comes to self-deception allows us to come up with some sort of crap that we use to justify why we're actually going back to the old behavior. Well, I couldn't succeed because of this. I couldn't succeed because of that. We give ourselves what we call our reasons, even though technically we could argue that they're more like excuses. And as a result of that, we put ourselves in situation time and time again that leads us to not the kind of results that we want. And then another thing that holds us back is the fact that we have a bias blind spot. That is, we think that everyone else struggles with confirmation bias or overconfidence bias or any of these cognitive biases. We think that everybody else is in trouble, except for us. We're the ones that are able to think rationally. We're the ones that are able to think sensibly. But other people, oh my goodness, I'm telling you, they deceive themselves. So for all of those sort of reasons, we tend to delude ourselves, and it can be very problematic because it limits us so much, because it creates a sort of a narrative or a story that we live in that prevents us from taking the kind of actions that we really need to take in order for us to succeed. Now, how we delude ourselves is that we allow different parts of our psychology to come up and, as I said, create a sort of stories around the various different changes we want to make, about the various different decisions that we're considering. And what happens is that we are narrating or building a world for ourselves, an inner world that makes us feel okay about some of the limits we have. So in many ways, our brains are trying their best to maintain some sort of predictability. They want to be correct. And as a result of that, very early on, there's a process known as reactance. And reactance is the response that we have. And when we have this from the time we're toddlers, right? It's this process whereby we immediately react to whenever a person tries to convince us of something. So whenever someone tries to convince us of something, we tend to have a natural response to that. And that response that we have to whatever they're trying to make us do is usually no. If you ever check to see what a child's first words are, it's no, right? Before mama, before papa, before dada, it's no. Because they're trying to reassert their authority. Because we know intuitively, based probably on evolution as well, no doubt, that whenever someone is trying to get us to do something, that might not always be in our best interest. So therefore, we need to maintain our autonomy and do whatever's right for us. Once again, part of maintaining our autonomy is finding reasons as to why we should engage in something versus why we shouldn't. And that means that we can delude ourselves into thinking that we're doing this for the right reason, whereas what we're really doing is just trying to maintain this form of autonomy for ourselves. Also, we have what we call selective attention. We can delude ourselves by only focusing on specific things. So ignoring some of the things that we don't want to think of. Let me give you a political example, for instance. If you're on the left, more than likely, you're taking in a lot more news, a lot more information from channels that are left-leaning. When you're on the right, you're more likely to be listening to and taking on news and information from channels that are more on the right. Now, sometimes what people will do is they will go to a channel that's not all the way on the left or all the way on the right, and then they will claim that as an example of them being unbiased. But they might only check out one article, or they might occasionally breeze through the channel. And then they will quote that as, well, I watch all types of news from all channels. But if they really were to add up the amount of time that they spent, for example, on CNN, if you're in the States for Fox News, you'd find yourself spending a copious amount of time watching just coverage from them. Or when you go on Facebook or Instagram or whatnot, you find yourself spending a lot more time engaging with and reading posts that are pro versus anti or anti versus pro. And invariably what happens is that this selective attention means that we're exposing ourselves only to ideas that confirm what we want to believe in. And the challenge with that is we find ourselves lost in these, what are known as echo chambers, where all we hear is exactly what we want to hear. We're preaching to the converted and we are the converted being preached to. And that's problematic because it gives us a heightened sense of conviction about our own perspective. And it makes us less likely to challenge ourselves. We're deluded, and now we have even more justification for our delusions. We believe it and we're convinced of it because, well, everybody is saying it, except them. And the them is anyone that's not in these echo groups. And that's also why we can sometimes feel when someone has a moderate perspective, well, immediately we attack them just like we'd attack people on the other side. Because if you're not with us, you're against us. And this tribal mentality makes it even worse. But ultimately speaking, as I mentioned, we build these narratives, these stories that a lot of times have very emotive language to convince ourselves that the world is a certain way. And as a result of that, everything fits in. We figure out who's the hero, who's the villain, who's the goodies, who's the baddies. And as a result of that, we live our lives through that dimension. We do this in our personal life as well. Whenever we're in a relationship and something goes wrong, do we blame ourselves? Do we blame them? Are we the goodies? Are they the baddies? And we forget to incorporate the importance of nuance. Once again, we delude ourselves with these stories that we tell ourselves that makes us feel like we're correct. And because we want to keep feeling correct, we resist the potential or the possibility of being wrong. So at a more granular level then, why do we do this? Why do we delude ourselves? Well, specifically, if we start to look at the identities that we have, these are the beliefs that we have about who we are. We want to be a certain type of person. And a certain type of person is often defined by whatever they support. So for example, are you a Democrat? Are you a Republican? Are you a libertarian? Those are some of the choices that people have in terms of America when it comes to voting and politics. So it's not, will you vote Democrat per se? A lot of times people are called that. And even if they're not called those words specifically, they're probably called a conservative or a liberal. And as a result of that, the label labels you as a person, an identity. And so when you're labeled in a certain way, with that labeling comes a connotation and an expectation that this is the type of person that you are, that these are the kinds of things that you support and believe in. Now, if you're the kind of person that goes, well, I support this party about this, but I don't support them in this, then that's going to be more difficult for you to define yourself as. It's much easier for you to, generally speaking, label yourself as the group itself. Now, I know some people do it. Some people say, I'm socially conservative or I'm socially liberal and I'm economically conservative. There's all ways around it. But the more nuanced that you get, the more accurate you get, in other words, the harder it is to find a big category or big generalization to hide under. And the reason why we seek to deceive ourselves around the identity is because we really want to hold on to a clear, simple way of understanding who we are. And as a result of that, we'll often deceive ourselves about what's going on in the world so we can feel like a particular type of person, so we can feel that we're on the right side of history, to feel that we're the right kind of people. And that's also why, by the way, we virtue signal. Virtue signaling is whenever we talk to Facebook or Instagram or whatever it is, and we tell people what we feel. I stand with whoever it is that you stand with. And I'm not going to get into politics. I'm not going to get into all the different examples. But whenever we say we stand with someone, that's us declaring that I believe in this cause. I'm on their side. And the problem with that is as soon as we say that we're on that side, while it makes us feel good and while it might even build connections with other people who are also on that side, what it does is it falls into the trap of labeling that there's two sides, only two sides. And you're either this side, you're either standing with A or you're standing with B. And this doesn't matter if it's conservative versus liberal. It doesn't matter if it's Biden versus Trump. which was that election. It doesn't matter if COVID exists or it doesn't exist, mask wearing or not mask wearing. It doesn't matter if it's Brexit or no Brexit. It doesn't matter if it's Israel, Palestine, Ukraine. It doesn't matter. All of these are the same in the sense that we amalgamate everything and then we see very strongly, this is the side I'm on and this is the other side and the opposite side, and they're 100% wrong. And when we fall into that trap and fall into those dichotomies, immediately it makes us feel like our identity is at stake. And therefore, we need to be very clear, very specific. We need to make sure that we let people know what side we're on. And that limits us because it means that we can only really fall into line with the larger group identity. Our worldview is another way in which we struggle to be able to avoid self-delusion. We organize the way in which the world works in our mind. We tell ourselves a coherent narrative, and we don't like that narrative challenged. So, for example, you believe that the world's governments are conspiring against certain situations or certain people or certain organizations, then you're going to maintain that belief. And that belief is going to continuously direct your attention to every example where that's correct. If your worldview is that I can't remember what the famous conspiracy theories were, but there's like frog people. I think that was it. Frog people ruling the mass on the moon. I'm totally screwing that up. But some crazy, wacky type conspiracy theory about how the world works, then you're going to see everything through that filter. If you see that there's one side, for example, there's governments, and then anyone who resists the government is a terrorist, then you're going to see the world through that lens as well. We're going to tell the stories that we're going to tell. And those stories are then going to convince us that this is the way the world is. But this is us deluding ourselves, trying to simplify everything. And again, the whole identity of the whole worldview, that's not a case of us deluding ourselves because it makes us feel happy. It's deluding ourselves so that things are simpler. I can have a worldview where I don't have to use much cognitive energy. I can see the goodies and the baddies. And we don't like when there's too much nuance, because then we really have to understand the situation more deeply. We can't just go, I'm on this side, and then we don't have to worry about it. Because when we do go on one side versus the other, it's so easy. We decide on it, and then we just join it. We go to the echo chambers where everyone's saying the same thing, and we bask in our rightness while we turn to the other side and either label them either bad people, evil people, or just really dumb and sheep because they follow the horde. And so it helps us to feel better about ourselves because it's so much easier. The problem is it's not very accurate. Furthermore, we like to stay in the communities. We get a lot of pleasure out of being surrounded by people who we feel significant in front of because they believe the same things we do. And we get rewarded. We get liked now on social media for saying things. Even if those things are quite extreme or quite negative, we get liked when we're in a community of other people that agree with the same things we do. So once again, that helps us to stay in this world of self-delusion because we think, well, lots of people like it, therefore the whole motivated reasoning thing comes up. There's also the notion of self-serving bias, which is a psychological concept whereby we're more likely to attribute the reasons for our actions, if they're positive, as being internal. Well, the reason I did that positive thing is because I was thinking about it and this is the kind of thing I would do. Versus if it's negative, well, only reason I did that negative thing is because of the external situation that occurred. And also fundamental attribution error, which is when we tend to give the benefit of the doubt to ourselves, but to the other side, not so much. The reason they did the bad thing was because what they do. Whereas the reason why they did the good thing was, well, the circumstances worked out quite well for them. So self-serving bias, fundamental attribution error, the community we surround ourselves with, the worldview we have, and the identity that we have are all reasons why we like to delude ourselves. Because we want to be right. We want to be on the right side. We want to feel good. And most importantly, we want everything to be understandable and simple so that our brain can feel like it's in control and it can feel like it can make the best predictions possible. Great. We can make great predictions. It's wonderful. You know the problem though? We're lying to ourselves. We're lying to ourselves by generalizing, by creating this summary. And as a result of that, we live in a world that doesn't really exist. And I'm not saying that we're like fully caught in the matrix or whatnot, or we're living in a simulation per se, But I'm saying that we live in a world that doesn't exist because the world that we live in is based upon the stories we tell ourselves about what's actually going on. And it manifests in a number of ways. First of all, we're attracted to the stories that make us look good and reinforce our worldview. So whenever we hear stories that agree with our perspective, we feel good because we think, exactly, that's why I'm correct. Not only are we deluded, but now our delusions are even stronger because we've been agreed with by a number of people. And so we tend to seek out people with similar views to us so that we can feel even more right. So we post and we read other people's posts and we gradually egg each other on in this way. We seek every bit of extreme evidence to suggest that we're correct without any doubt at all. So we look at all news, even fake news, things that haven't been verified, and we go, well, it's probably this way or that way. And if there's any ambiguity whatsoever, if ever we are in a situation where two people are saying, no, you did it, we will take the side that we want to take. Why? Because again, that makes us feel good. We fall into the trap of group polarization. And as a result of this, we are of the mob mentality where we lose track of ourselves and we just become the kind of people that we want to be. We say, I'm on this side, and then we stick to our guns on this way. In doing so, we delude ourselves and we trap ourselves in this endless cycle of stories that we're telling ourselves that continuously convince us that things are not the way we want them to be. That's problematic. And so to deal with all of this, what is it that we can do? I hear you ask. Well, I'm glad you asked, because the first thing that we need to do is we need to always be skeptical of one-sided stories. One of the things that I want to share with you as a really great skill that I've practiced over the last few years is to always look for two sides to the story. Always look for more than one side. And as soon as you see an article written that's one-sided, always be skeptical. It doesn't mean you don't read it. It doesn't mean you don't take it in. It doesn't mean maybe you don't even believe it, but you're skeptical of it. You're not buying it hook, line, and sinker. You're always then looking for what's an equal perspective on the opposite side. When you train yourself to only look at an article that is one-sided after you've looked at another article that's one-sided, and you start to look for, they're both right about, that's when you start to find yourself more of a critical thinker. You want to also be skeptical of hyperbole, exaggeration. Whenever someone's using very strong language, once again, hesitate before you fall for it, hook, line, and sinker. Realize that when people are using hyperbole, it's a rhetorical device designed to create strong emotion to make it so that you're more angry or upset or fearful. And as a result, you're more likely to believe what it is that they're saying. So always be skeptical of hyperbole, always be skeptical of one-sided stories, and always differentiate fact from opinion. Over the last few years, journalism has become a lot more opinion-oriented because opinions are what gets a lot more of the eyeballs than just facts. I mean, this is just, it makes sense. If I want to get more attention, I'll give you my opinions as opposed to telling you what the facts are. But facts matter. And so what we really want to do is we really want to distinguish between facts and opinion. And this is difficult to do sometimes because everyone comes to the table and says, my facts don't care about your feelings and all this sort of stuff, which is a nice token statement. At the end of the day, though, they might say that, but just because they say certain things are fact doesn't mean that they're facts. Most of the time when people say it, they're actually opinions because they're full of these hyperbole and emotional filled words, and they're full of a specific narrative or story they're trying to ram down your throat on both sides, on all sides really, of an issue. So it's imperative that we're skeptical of one-sided stories, that we're skeptical of hyperbole, and that we're able to differentiate what's an actual fact, like something that both sides agree on. And that's the thing that we can look at is if both sides that agree on something, we can be 100% sure that it's a fact. Well, not 100% sure, but we can be pretty sure that if both sides who hate each other with totally different perspectives agree on that fact, then we can be sure that it's a fact or be pretty sure it's a fact. We also want to establish the identity of ourselves as somebody that's open to changing their mind and has nuanced perspectives. If you see yourself as the kind of person that has nuanced perspectives and has an open mind and can change your mind, that's game changing because that means you're in a position to rethink your assumptions, to challenge the way in which you're thinking, and to be open to looking for what's really going on, as opposed to being the kind of person that I'm on this side no matter what. And while that might give you some pleasure in the short term because it shows how loyal you are, it also means that you're not really looking for what's actually going on. You're too busy trying to be the best storyteller in the room. And what you really need to do is to recognize that when you build an identity of yourself as the kind of person open, the kind of person who has demonstrated that they have a nuanced perspective, that doesn't just make a declarative statement about the way things are or use hyperbole, then people take you a lot more seriously because they know that you're not going to allow bias to infect you or affect you in that way. Somewhere along the way, we demand to know a person's perspective and we ask what side a person's on because we make that as, I suppose, almost like a gatekeeping question to determine whether or not we're going to listen to them or be friends with them. Somewhere along the way, we started to do that. And that's problematic because if you only decide to be friends with someone because they're on one side of an issue, then you're going to not only restrict the amount of people that you can connect with or be friends with, but you're also going to build more of an echo chamber and a bubble for yourself. And you're going to become more right. And you're going to be polarized even more because you're not getting exposed to people with different points of view. And let me say this, and this is an important piece. Oftentimes when people say, I'm not going to be friends with someone who doesn't share my values. So let's take the political thing. Let's talk about that. Let's imagine you're a conservative and your friend's a liberal. And you say, because they're a liberal, I can no longer be friends with, because I can't be friends with someone who doesn't share my values, or vice versa. You're a liberal and your friend's a conservative and you say, I can't be friends with someone who doesn't share my values. Let me ask you a question. What values don't they share? Because my guess is that if you really dig to, ultimately speaking, what values both sides of most issues share, those values are the fundamentals that most human beings share. It's important to be honest. It's important to care for other human beings. It's important to say, like, all of these things are the values that we all share, no matter what side of the fence you're on. And I would say the overwhelming majority of human beings across the world, across the planet, share the same values. The problem isn't the values. The problem is the positions. And there's this notion of, I can't talk to someone or I can't listen to someone. I can't be around someone just because they have a different point of view or perspective than me. Some of my closest friends have totally different, the opposite points of view, positions from a political standpoint. But they don't share different values. We share similar values. It's just their perspective is that who they support personifies the values that they think are most important. And who I support, I believe, the opposite to. But the reality is we just have different positions. And so there's what we call a HIN model in negotiation, which stands for positions, interests, and need. And the position is, what is the position you take? Then the interest is, what is it that makes it so that this is the right decision for you? And then the needs is, what is ultimately speaking what you absolutely need? And need here is almost like more like values, right? It's what's crucial to you. But so often we mix these up and we think because a person is a different position to me, oh, they don't share my values, even though you're not talking about values. You're talking about opinion or perspective. How can I be friends with someone if they this? And I know it seemed like I was going on a rant there, but the reason why I wanted to bring it up is because in order for us to be able to stop deluding ourselves, we need to give ourselves the opportunity to be around more folk with a different point of view. When we're able to expose ourselves to different people with different perspectives, things that we agree with, things that we don't, it's revolutionary for what it does for our mind. When I went to Afghanistan, I had interviews with a number of people of very, very different points of view of the way in which they believe society should be run. But instead of me arguing with them or saying, I think that's this, or saying to myself even, oh, that's such a backwards perspective, which a lot of times people will fall into the trap of saying, instead, what I'm trying to do is trying desperately to understand they have a different way of doing things. Let me try to understand where they're coming from. Let me try to understand why they do the things that they do. And sure enough, when you dig deep enough, you realize we share the same kind of values. So what I'm trying to point out is that when we're able to differentiate fact and opinions and avoid this one-sided story, we put ourselves in a position where we can see things with more perspective. Another thing to do is to avoid allowing your way of thinking to impact your relationship. Allow your way of thinking to negatively impact your relationships. And this is not just about political things or world things. This is in general. Any of the beliefs that you have, if you know other people disagree with them, you can still be honest about them, but try to make it so that you're also respectful of someone else's point of view. A lot of times you've heard of situations where Thanksgiving is ruined. And Thanksgiving is ruined because you've got two people in the room that have very, very different points of view of something. But my question, first of all, is not like both parties come to the table not aware of that. Most of the time, someone has a very different point of view. Why is it brought up? Why is it discussed in length in a way that both of you know it's going to make you angry? If you're open to having an argument about it or a debate about it, whereby both of you are looking to learn from it, that's one thing. But most of the time, you're not thinking about that, not in your personal life. So why are we falling the trap of allowing our points of view to infect the relationships that we have? We need to expose ourselves to people with different perspectives and always look for balanced point of view and understand that neither of you really knows. Just because you put one point of view and the other person has a different point of view doesn't mean either one of you are right. More than likely, it's a lot more complex and nuanced than either of you can understand. And therefore, all you can do is guess. And both of you are just making guesses. But when you can see the same situation from a multitude of perspectives, it allows you to be able to have more clarity, more understanding, and more, quite frankly, empathy for the people that you're talking to. And so in order for us to stop being deluded by ourselves, we need to realize, number one, that we are deluding ourselves. We are painting pictures of a world to ourselves, which makes us feel good in the moment, but traps us and limits us from listening to other people's perspectives. And sometimes that's going to be about world events, but sometimes it's going to be about your own life. You can believe that you're not a good person or not good enough at a particular thing because you've convinced yourself with a story and you've deluded yourself into thinking that you'll never succeed. But maybe there's another alternative perspective that you're not considering. Maybe you're not spending enough time around the kind of people that would help you to believe in yourself. Maybe you're not open enough to the idea that maybe, just maybe, you can change yourself. You can change the world. You can change your mind. But it's easier to stay in the world that we build for ourselves. In The Matrix, Neo's given the chance to decide whether he takes the blue pill or the red pill. And when he makes this decision, he's deciding that he wants out of the Matrix. He wants to be able to see what's really going on. Thousands of years ago, Socrates asked questions to try to understand what is correct, what is true. He would ask questions that pissed a lot of people off because people would think that they understand something, and they would say, "What do you mean by that?" and try to explain it to me. And he would ask the questions to the point where in every situation, people will realize, I actually amn't as sure as I thought I was. And Socrates was so famous, largely because intuitively we understand how powerful this is. When we can stop and realize that we're not as correct as we think we are, we don't know as much as we think we do, and we are, in fact, constantly deluding ourselves, that awareness is the first step towards transforming everything. Because then we can start to realize, well, since I'm always going to be deluding myself, how can I minimize this? How can I open up my point of view so I learn more, so I expose myself to more perspectives, and I'm able to see things from a more diverse and more strategic point of view? Whenever you're able to open your mind like that, you're able to take in a lot more information, and information that can empower you. This was a deep enough one. I hope you found it useful. I hope you found it interesting. I hope it has kept you engaged. For now, take care, be well. Please do sign up for my newsletter where I go into things like this and try to change your mind on certain topics. It's called Inner Propaganda. You can sign up at owenfitzpatrick.com/newsletter for free. And please do rate and review the podcast if you enjoy it and if you like it. Thanks very much. Be well. May the force be with you, and may you continue not just to believe, but to believe better. Bye for now.